Let's get going. Good afternoon, everyone. Brilliant to have you with us. My name is Esther, and I am part of the team for the ChurchWorks Commission. Alicia, could you just pop the slides up for the... There we go. Just a little illustration of who we are at ChurchWorks. So we began in October 2021, and we kind of evolved out of the campaign called Your Neighbour, which was live over COVID. And ChurchWorks consists of 16 commissioning organisations represented by senior church leaders, and we gather together to unite to promote action on urgent social issues in our communities. And we're here to help churches and Christian organisations collaborate with each other and with the government to bring about partnership work across our three mission areas that you can see on the slide there. And our next slide illustrates our commissioners there with the Faith Minister. And we are working at the moment towards our ChurchWorks Summit, which will be on the 27th of February 2026. We're continuing to focus on specific projects that we've been doing as part of those mission areas. And also over the last year, we've established our collabs. And our collabs exist to do these three things: to build relationships across denominations and charities, to resource attendees, to share and encourage best practice, and to equip all of us to discern and to act, particularly when it comes to government engagement. And our conversation, our meeting today, is part of our anti-poverty collab work. And so to start us off this afternoon even, I'm still in morning mode. To start off this afternoon, I'm going to hand over to Rachel Lampard, who is one of the co-chairs of our anti-poverty collab.
Very much, Esther, and good afternoon, everybody. So I work for the Methodist Church, and I'm one of the commissioners for ChurchWorks. We held our first collab on poverty last autumn. And at that meeting, Niall Cooper from Church Action on Poverty raised the very timely and appropriate critique that we weren't hearing from people who themselves were experiencing the struggle against poverty. So from that came the conversation about how we might do that, how within the collab, but then also how we might resource churches and charities who are all wanting to try and do this more as part of our commitment to tackling poverty. And this webinar has come from that conversation and that commitment. I'm really delighted to be welcoming Church Action on Poverty today. I've worked with them probably now for, I think, 2 decades, and have met some great people, some of whom are on screen during that time. I'm particularly delighted to welcome Niall, who's worked for Church Action on Poverty now for 28 years and is soon going to be, well, I'm not going to say retiring, but leaving. And in that time has helped churches to really try and work differently, think differently about the way that we tackle poverty. So very grateful that Church Action on Poverty have come along to help resource this webinar. I'm going to begin with a short prayer, which is actually from a Church Action on Poverty book. Quick plug here: Dignity, Agency and Power, which stories, prayer and reflections from Church Action on Poverty. So shall we just begin by praying together? Compassionate God, open our hearts that we may feel the breath and play of your Spirit. Unclench our hands that we may reach out to one another in openness and generosity. Free our lips that we may speak along with those whose voices are not heard. Unblock our ears to hear the cries of the brokenhearted, and open our eyes to see Christ in friend and stranger, that in sharing our love and our pain, our poverty and our prosperity, we may move towards that peace and justice which come from you, and so be bearers of divine reconciliation. Amen. Niall, I think we're handing over to you now. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. And it is really great to be with you all today with my colleagues Felicity and Gav. Yes, the format for today, although we're on Zoom, we're going to try and make this a participatory experience because I think we want to kind of model what good participation looks like. Zoom has its limitations, and ideally we'd be doing this face-to-face because our experience is generally that if we're talking about facilitating good participation, that's much easier done when everybody's in the space together. Although we did actually facilitate a whole process with a panel of people with lived experience during lockdown, where we had, I think, about a dozen people that we had regular monthly meetings with online. And at the end of the process, it felt like we all knew each other and had spent, got to know each other really well. And people felt very positive about participation. So we'll twice do breakout sessions and then some feedback using Mentimeter and conversation and chat. And I think what we're going to try and do is give a flavour of some of the principles involved in lived experience work, particularly working with people with lived experience of poverty, which is something we've been doing at Church Action on Poverty for, as Richard said, for many years in many different ways. So we're going to draw on some of our learning. When I was talking with Esther and Alicia about what would be good, I think one of the things that came out was, what difference does it make? So I'll just start with a very short story, which is the Salford Poverty Truth Commission that I facilitated with a couple of colleagues several years ago now. I won't go in too much about the nature of the Poverty Truth Commission itself now, because we'll actually have a video about it later. But what that created was a space for deep listening and safe conversation between people that had, in that case, experienced council tax bailiffs sent by the council, and an amazing workshop with the head of council tax, where people with lived experience gently deconstructed his lovely process for collecting council tax, but came up with some really practical ideas for making things better, including council coffee mornings. So Salford Council now has coffee mornings that you can go and chat with somebody about council tax problems, other debt problems, and have a human interaction rather than just talking with somebody on a call centre or trying to do it online. That's led to that, and other things has led to less use of bailiffs, and actually more council tax collected. So it was a win-win for the council, but also for people struggling against poverty, that they actually have a human interaction with the council now, rather than a very impersonal process. So that's a little illustration of what can be achieved when you work with people with lived experience. And the idea for the coffee morning came from somebody with lived experience of poverty, who could see what the problem was and could see perfectly well from their perspective what the solution would work for them. And in the space that they were able to exercise that their own agency, they said, well, why don't we do this? Because this worked for me back in Ireland where I grew up, and that's now been taken up. So that's a kind of really good example of what can be changed. And if you get a council on board, then you can make that change. Part of the conversation we're having is about how churches need to do that kind of thing as well, that we need to change our own practices and learn from the lived experience insights of people who live with poverty on a daily basis, not only understand what's wrong, can see what's good and not so good about what organisations, churches, charities are doing, particularly ones that they're interacting with on a regular basis, but can see what could be even better. And it's leaning into the idea that people with lived experience are not kind of passive people that we need to fix, but actually people with knowledge and insight and deep understanding and great ideas. And if we actually create the space, then we're all better off if we work with people and find space for their active contribution to the process, whatever that process is. What I want to do for the first phase of the kind of first of our two topics, if we could have on screen the ladder of participation, which I found helpful. It's actually from a guy called Arnstein. I've never actually looked who Arnstein was, but as back in 1969 came up with this idea. So participation is not a one thing. It's not a you either do it or you don't. But there's a ladder of participation. And the further you go up the ladder, the more control, the greater the level of participation. So very briefly, I mean, it's quite simply explained, but at the bottom there are two rungs which are really non-participation. The bottom one, which I would hope churches are not prone to, but I think having this laid out helps us all in our thinking, that there's an illusion of participation when actually there's no power to people in the process at all. When it talks here on the table about stakeholders, in this context, we're talking about people with lived experience of poverty, struggling against poverty, that there is no agency for them at all in the process. And therefore, it's if you say this is a participatory process and there is no opportunity at all for involvement, actually that's manipulation. The next one up is something which I think is a bit more common, which is that stakeholders, people in poverty, are passive recipients, and that our role is to educate them or to fix them or to do things for them or to them. That's not participation. That's the dynamic is different. Then there are three where Arnstein says this is a form of participation, but it's quite tokenistic. So the third one up the ladder is informing, where stakeholders are informed about decisions or policies or what we're doing, but they've got no opportunity to contribute. But they at least have information. That's the limit of what their engagement is. The next one up is consultation. And a lot of the time when we talk about participation, actually we're talking about consultation, where stakeholders, their views are sought, sometimes on a large scale, sometimes very limited. But actually the decisions are still made by the people that control the process. So we might ask your opinion about what colour your door might be, but we make the final decision. There was a whole process I was involved in. It wasn't what I observed a few years ago. Manchester Council said we're going to consult with our tenants about a whole redevelopment, and it ended up being a consultation about the colour of the doors. So that was very limited, very tokenistic. The next one up is stakeholders can shape the ideas, but still the final decision on what happens sits with the facilitators, with people not with lived experience. So the professionals or the people running the project. So that's placation. You might want to kind of dispute some of these terms, but this is what Arnstein said. And it's kind of, I think it's helpful to kind of see the different levels of the rungs. So the three where Arnstein says this is actually about higher levels of participation and citizen power. The first one is partnerships, where stakeholders have a direct involvement in decision making, whether it's equal, but they do have some involvement in the decisions that go beyond just being consulted. That's partnership. Delegated power is where the overall goals for anything are still set by the facilitator, but the resources and responsibility are given to citizens or to people with lived experience. So within the space that somebody else has created, they have a fair degree of control. And right at the top is citizen control, where the stakeholders, so a group of people with lived experience, actually have the idea, set up the project, and control the whole process. And that's right at the top rung. As you can see from this, there are a lot of different levels on the ladder, and some are non-participation, some are tokenistic, some involve genuine delegation or handing over of power. So what I'd like us to do is to break. Oh no, hang on. Have we got Penny?
Penny has joined, yes.
Penny, are you? I can see you. Penny can't hear you or see you. Hi, Penny.
Hello.
Penny is one of our lived experience activists from Baikar in the northeast. How are you doing, Penny?
Presently, I am in Sunderland. And it's nice and sunny.
Lovely. I don't know whether you want to share, I mean, not your whole story of involvement, because that's quite a long story, but what's your reflection on what participation means to you, and maybe the difference between participation and consultation?
For me, participation is the key to having people's voices heard. If you're participating, then it's people want to hear what you've got to say. If they don't, and you're just being tokenistic, then it's just not really. It's hard to sit there and say what you've got to say and then find out, oh, well, you were just a tokenistic person that was there. Being involved and being valued and participating in everything that you can do is the better way to engage with people. You find you get more out of it as an organisation, as well as like sort of the person that you are supporting or you're asking for them to be, part of your crowd.
And what would you say makes something a genuine participation?
Not just being sat there and not asked questions. You've got to engage with people. You welcome them in, and you don't make them just sit there and listen to what you've got to say. You've got to take your time with people. That's something that, Church Action on Poverty, I've been with them since 2018, so I've been with Church Action on Poverty a while. But you have taken the time to listen to me. You know how I work. You know how things get to me and sometimes how things have got to be, part of the disabilities that I've got and things like that. So that's you sort of working with me to bring out the best in me. If people have seen sort of the stuff that I've done with CAP, you have brought the best in me out. And I certainly wouldn't be where I am today without the involvement of CAP. So, this is me going on, I'm sort of working full time now. And at one stage I couldn't even get out of the house. So, it's made a big difference. But I still there's still times where we get involved in things and it is just tokenistic. And you're sitting there and you're thinking, why did I bother? And it makes you so downhearted. and you just don't want to do anything else.
Do you want to just share maybe one of the kind of best things you've been involved in over that time?
It's got to be America. You know, it cannot be anything else, Neil. I mean, that was one of the best things, and that was through Food Power. So it was, you know, it was still a lot of people, but I bumped into somebody last week. I was in Birmingham at a DEFRA conference, and he went, I know you, Penny. He says, you used to do the Food Power stuff. He says, when I worked at Sustain. And I went, did you? I went, oh, well. You know, I couldn't remember him, but he remembered me.
And so tell us what you did in America then, Penny.
Oh, we went to a conference with a good few people. I would say there was a good couple of hundred people. But they showed us the difference there is in the systems. So the difference we have in this country and how we treat our people that need to have extra food or don't have enough money, and the difference to the way the Americans treat them. And it's their system's flawed even more than ours is. And it is disheartening to see it. But they're fighting back a little bit more now. And things are getting a little bit easier. But it's growing. Everybody over there is into now growing. So you grow your own fruit and veg. You can over there, because, I mean, we started off in North Carolina. It was 100 degrees Fahrenheit the day we went into there. So, yeah, they've got a great growing season. But you can only grow so much. But everything they do, so they had like a community plot that grew the food, and you had your own little plot there. And then if you grew too much or you had a surplus, you would just give it back to the organisation and they would sell it at the farmers market. So everything's used. There's a lot more farmers markets and, you know, spare pieces of ground, and everybody grew something in.
And what difference did it make to you, Penny, having that opportunity to go to the States?
I brought back a wealth of knowledge, which I have gone on to share many, many times. The fact that you've got to provide a wraparound service. It's not just you come in, you provide food, you go. So you've got to have a wraparound service where you come in, you sit and talk to people. People will tell you, you know, ask them if they've got everything they need, if they've got all the benefits and things that they need. And then you go on to the food side of things. And then you're making sure that they have healthy, nutritious food as well when you're giving out the food parcels, which is something I brought back here, which was, you know, wraparound service. Mm-hmm. Is the citizens' advice get less and less able to sort of have them in big offices and things. You get the citizens' advice to actually come out into either your food bank or your food pantry, and you get the wraparound service there. So you get them in, and then you get the health service in, and then you get other agencies in that do fuel and things like that. It's a one-stop shop, basically. And it's taken over from where we used to have the citizens' advice, which we still have, but it's worked to death, poor things. And then we just, you know, pick up the pieces. But it means everybody's getting the support that they need.
And if you were going to offer one piece of advice to people in organisations that want to get to do more work around involving people with lived experience, what would you say that would be?
Listen. Because it's no good you want to work with people with lived experience if you don't actually listen to them. They're taking a big chunk of their guts, shall we say, to turn around and tell people about their experiences. And for somebody to not even listen to them or comprehend what they are saying, then you've got no reason of being there with them.
Thanks, Penny. Whatever you're doing in Sunderland, thanks for taking the time out to come and be with us. And it's great to see you.
Yep, have a happy retirement.
Oh, well, I'm going to be malingering, not retiring. So,
Okie dokie. See you later.
Penny. So now what we're going to do is go into breakout rooms for about 10 minutes to give you the opportunity to discuss what you've heard up to now, and particularly around a conversation about where, in terms of any work you're doing, I mean, you might want to pick a particular piece of work, project, context that you're in, where you think you are on the ladder of participation, or that particular piece of work was. Where was it on the ladder of participation? And where do you see your work around participation going? And presumably you've come because there's something you might be interested in doing. So where might that be? And what might be the barriers to moving up the ladder of participation in your own context? So you've got 10 minutes in, I think, relatively small groups. So an opportunity for everybody to kind of share a few thoughts on that. And then we'll come back together. It was a useful conversation. We had quite an interesting chat in our space. What we're going to try and do is capture some of your conversation and thoughts using a feedback tool, which I'm hoping Alicia can explain. Slido?
Yes, of course. So you can join the Slido poll either by scanning the QR code in the top left or going to slido.com on your computer or laptop and entering that code there, 1787553. And these options should come up. And what we'd love for you to do is to reflect a little bit more on what rung of the ladder of participation you are currently on and share that with the group. And then this slide will update live as we've just seen.
It's entirely anonymous. So if you want to be honest that you're just manipulating people, nobody will spot who you are.
Do you scan the code?
You can scan the code, I think, using a phone, and then...
Yes, that's correct. You can either scan the code or go to the website below on your laptop or computer.
I just don't want to lose you if I go off. Oh, it's gone.
It did it very quickly.
Has it? Can it go back to the slide a minute?
Yes, there we go. My apologies.
Thank you. Sorry.
Whilst a few people are still filling that in, but have people got any more general feedback? Maybe around the question of what are the barriers to moving further up the ladder, which you want to just kind of, you can either stick your hand up or you can just talk, because we're a fairly small group. Or any other kind of observations you want to make from the conversation you've just had.
I think some of our challenges are we're all kind of at work, in work mode, but when we're trying to organise events where we can hear from those who lived experience, it's really hard because they're living their lives. They're not fitting into our kind of 9 to 5. So it's the logistics, I guess, around of it we often struggle with.
I think that's something I'll come on to, but I think actually having the time and the space in busy lives, busy stressful work situations to do this well is a challenge.
Yes.
So that's quite encouraging that half are at partnership level. somebody's been good enough to say they're at placation level. Equally, somebody's at citizen control, which is fab. And about just over a third are in somewhere in the kind of consultation space. So that's good. I think what we could do is move on to the next topic. Unless has anybody else got another comment or question, or has the ladder raised any kind of thoughts for you? If not, what I'll do then is move on to the kind of second topic. We are kind of, what we're trying to do is cover what we do in a fairly short space of time, but just to give you kind of some of the flavour of some of the kind of the issues and themes involved. And towards the end, we'll have a conversation about actually how do you take this forward, recognising that that's a longer term conversation. And we'll have and part of that is, well, what support can we give you in your context to help you move forward, whatever that might be. But the second topic I want to introduce is around the idea of created space. To make participation genuine, it has to be something where people feel safe and feel that they are able to participate. And therefore, the idea of a created space, which is specifically created to facilitate participation, for us is quite important. So if we could have the slide up with the difference between created spaces and invited spaces, and I'll say a bit more about that. So this, I can't remember who it was that said actually the challenge is finding time to do things when people are busy and in their own, in their own lives. So a lot of what particularly consultation involves, or participation which gets the default way that we end up doing things, is we invite people into spaces that we already function in. We'd say, you might say, for example, we've got a committee, let's get 2 people with lived experience onto the committee. Or we've got a meeting, let's invite people to the meeting. And it's actually a meeting that we would have been having anyway. It's a process that we would have been running anyway. And so we're inviting them in. Or a conference. I remember a few years ago, as part of the Food Power project that Penny talked about, there was a conference in Exeter, and they said, let's invite some people with lived experience to be part of the conference, to just come to the conference. People were being invited in, but they weren't involved in shaping the space. That's in contrast to the idea of a created space, where you actually co-create the space itself with people with lived experience. And the difference between the two is really quite interesting and key. So an invited space, conventionally, it's quite formal and structured. In a created space, it's usually much more informal and facilitated. It's not chaired, there's a facilitator enabling people to be in part of it. In an invited space, the issues are typically set in advance, an agenda. In a created space, the issues emerge through the process and through the conversation. People get a chance to actually say, this is what's important to me. Invited spaces, they're agenda-driven. We've got this much we've got to get through. In a created space, it's discussion-based. And you might start with a framework, but actually, when my experience of facilitating created spaces, that goes out the window 20 minutes into the meeting, because somebody brings something up and that's where the conversation goes. And our carefully laid plans are just out of the window, because that's the topic that people in the room want to talk about. Invited spaces have papers and reports and minutes, and our world of working is very paper-based. And created space is around conversation and feedback and flip charts. And there's a whole different culture to how you meet. And in the Poverty Truth Commission, I always was getting civic leaders saying, well, I haven't had the agenda yet. I haven't had the agenda yet. I haven't had the papers. There are no papers. There is no agenda. You just pitch up and you take part. Invited spaces, typically it's a boardroom, it's a meeting format, there's a table in the meeting, there's a chair at one end. Created space, you sit in a circle. There's no tables. It's you're having a conversation. Invited space, titles, formal roles, professional roles, who we are in that space. We are there in work capacity. Created space, it's much more around first names and being a human being. And we can all do it because we do it in our normal lives. But actually, it's quite a different kind of interaction to how we quite often work at work. Invited spaces, they're much more presentational. I'm doing presentational now. Created space, there's a lot of focus on deep listening. Penny talked about the importance of listening, and not just superficial listening, but deeply listening to what people are saying, what's going on, what people's experience has shaped what they're saying. So a deep listening process. And the more you can move from an invited space where people can come, but if they don't know the rules of that space, if they don't know the agenda, if they are not familiar reading papers, if they're alienated by a kind of structured process, if they haven't got a professional role and everybody else in the meeting's got a professional role, those are all impediments to them actually having full participation in that space. When you flip it to having created space and you invest the time to actually build that space with people, then it creates a much more level playing field, and it creates a space where people trust each other and get to know each other as people, and out of that conversation then are able to fully participate, fully talk about what's important to them, and actually shape the process itself. And that takes work, and it takes facilitation, and it takes us out of what I would say is the normal mode that most of us would work in a paid professional job, in an organisation that has a structure and likes to do things in a particular business-like way. The challenge, I think, is moving from one to the other and doing it well. And for us, there's a lot of learning involved in how to do that well. One thing I'd say about the Poverty Truth Commission, it took 18 months. I was facilitating it, and only at the end of the process did Laura, who was one of the grassroots commissioner, tell me I was safe. Basically, she said by then she'd learned to trust me. So issues about trust and feeling safe in the space to be yourself and not to be on your guard if you've somebody with lived experience who your experience of professionals is that you're either being judged or told what to do by professionals, or they actually have power over you because they're the GP, or they're the benefits advisor, or they're the DWP job coach. To actually break down those suspicions takes time. And that's what created space creates. But it's a whole different way of working. And it's a challenge to those of us that have we got the time to do that well. What I want to do is show a short video from a Poverty Truth Commission in Gateshead. And so briefly, a Poverty Truth Commission, you bring together typically a dozen people with lived experience for a period of time to create the space. And then you invite in a dozen civic and business leaders to meet every month for a year or 18 months. So it is genuinely a process of deep listening, and it's a created space as opposed to an invited space. And they're wonderful. They're a lot of time and investment, but the Gateshead Poverty Truth Commission produced this great video. So let's just watch the video.
Welcome to Gateshead Poverty Truth Commission. Poverty Truth Commission starts with a question.
What if the people who faced poverty directly were involved in the decisions about poverty?
This question comes from the belief that no lasting social change can happen without the people who suffer under the status quo taking a lead in bringing about a change to that status quo. A principle that can be seen throughout the history of social change, from the suffragettes to civil rights.
36% of children in Gateshead live in poverty.
Life expectancy in the northeast is declining. A man living in Felling can expect to live 15 fewer healthy years than is equivalent in Wickham, South and Sunnyside.
16% of Gateshead's population live in an area that is classed as one of the 10% most deprived in England.
But behind all these statistics are the lives of real people. And the Gateshead Poverty Truth Commission aims to give a face to the facts.
We gather a group of experts, people with direct experience of poverty in its many forms. Together, this group of commissioners come together to spend time sharing their stories and experiences with each other and consider who in Gateshead might have influence to bring change. Civic and business leaders are then invited to join the commission as co-commissioners.
The Poverty Truth Commission is not about the civic and business leaders and their organisations providing the solutions, but building relationships and empathy between commissions and seeing what happens when their combined resources,
experience
and wisdom are brought together.
The Commission recognises that there are experts and wisdom on all sides and seeks to unlock that wisdom through deep, generative listening. This goes beyond merely communicating facts. It even goes beyond empathic listening, where we try to see the world through another's eyes. Instead, we go to a deep, creative level,
where together individuals can connect to something larger than themselves and open and commit for new future possibilities.
Over time, this leads to the emergence of issues and themes which, through a variety of ways, commissioners begin to explore and address together.
Ultimately, our Poverty Truth Commission is about culture change, changing communities,
organisations,
and individuals' attitudes towards poverty and how to tackle it, and asking how everyone in Gateshead plays a part in dealing with poverty.
Gateshead Poverty Truth Commission is an attempt to give a face to the facts of poverty and create with maxim that nothing about us without us is for us.
Yeah, very true.
Great. So Poverty Truth Commission is a very, at the top end of involving people with lived experience. It does take typically 18 months. It's a lot of work. There've been about 18 or 20 around the country. Some they've now done 2 or 3. And there's a network that supports Poverty Truth Commission. So if you're interested in specifically Poverty Truth Commissions, if you want to look for the Poverty Truth Network website, the network not only supports commissions, but supports groups that are interested in setting up commissions. The reason I've shown that is because that kind of shows the value of what created space can do when you actually curate that well and invest in the relationships and deep listening that comes with that. In our experience, there's other ways that you can do that. But all of our work really is about bringing groups of people with lived experience together, because there's something also that happens when you get 6 or 8 or a dozen people with lived experience sharing stories with each other before you even get on to any other involving anybody else, which is that people build very quickly peer solidarity and peer support. And your role as a facilitator is still important, but actually the support people get from people that have similar experiences to their own is much greater. The other thing that happens is people that thought this was a personal problem or my fault, when they've heard 6 other people essentially share the same story, suddenly realise this is not me, this is something more structural. There's some bigger issue here that we all experience. And that was what happened with the Salford Poverty Truth Commission. When it became apparent that 6 of the grassroots commissioners had all had council tax bailiffs, this was not a personal problem that they had faced. This was a common shared problem. That was the starting point to say, well, let's work on this as a commission. And people had the confidence then to talk about what for them was a very traumatic experience, whereas previously they just didn't want to talk about it. Knowing there were 6 other people that had the same experience gave them the confidence to be able to talk openly about not only how traumatic it was, but what needed to change. So a group work process actually will get you much further than just trying to involve people with lived experience one-to-one, or getting 2 people with lived experience in a group where there's 15 other people, where they just won't feel that they've got any quality of participation. Last thing I want to talk about before we kind of go into breakout rooms again is we're trying now in Church Action on Poverty to do something akin to a Poverty Truth Commission, but with church leaders. We're trialling that in Manchester, where we've got 6 or 8 people with lived experience with a connection with church, and now 6 church leaders in a run to explore what is it as churches we need to learn and understand and do better in terms of our social and community engagement, but being informed by and the whole process being shaped by the experience of people who are both part of church or part of a church project or a user of a church project connected, but have lived experience and the insights that brings. So these approaches can be used to inform our own practice, as well as wider engagement with civic society and wider social policy and advocacy and campaigns, all of which we've done with similar processes. And indeed, we've done funding. We introduced with Oxfam participatory budgeting, which is exactly the same principle, that public funding, pots of public money, are best spent when you ask the people that they're for to vote literally on where this money needs to go. And the process of inviting a community not only to bid for money, but then come together to discern collectively what's the best use of that money was an amazing project to be part of. The Scottish Government's kind of mainstreamed that. And in Scotland, the Church of Scotland has piloted using that within church grant making setting. So participatory approaches can be used in a lot of different settings. It's the same kind of key concepts that I think are important in each of them. I had hoped to be able to talk to another of our lived experience activists, Steph, but he's, I think, got a hospital appointment today, so he's not been able to join us. What we're now going to do is go into breakout rooms again. And the conversation questions this time are, where would you see the possibilities for engaging more with people with lived experience? And what would be helpful to you to enable that to happen? So where would you see the possibilities for more engagement with people with lived experience? And what would be helpful for you in your personal capacity or organisation to enable that to actually become a reality? Back again. Again, we were in a slightly different group, but really great conversation we were part of. So we've got another feedback tool, which is around what kind of help might be useful in taking whatever it is you want to take forward. If you've got a kind of particular idea or a thought in your mind, or something you're working on in your organisation, what would be helpful that we might be able to provide or source for you or work with you on? Is it case studies of successful ways of working? Is it assembling some web-based resources or pointing to existing resources? Is it short course training, kind of online courses, an hour or two? Is it longer training? and we can talk a bit about some of the training we're putting together. Would it be part of an action learning set where you're actually learning with other organisations that are also doing similar things? Might it be useful to have mentoring? Poverty Truth Commission, the main thing they do to help set up a Poverty Truth Commission is give you a mentor who's already done it. Or is it the one at the bottom? Can't see from the notes. Is that it? The order's changed now as it's going, so there we go. You can see the list and you're filling it in, which is fabulous. I think whilst we're doing that again, if you've got more thoughts on what you can see from your conversations in your small groups, that you might, what's your next step or where the possibilities are, and a bit more about what would be helpful to help you take that step, be love to hear them now. So if you want to kind of chip in, you can use the chat as well if you want to just put a question or a comment in the chat. But if you want to just kind of unmute yourself and chip in, feel free.
Yeah, for us, I think one of the, I mean, it's many things, but one of the things is allocating more time to it, rather than like we've done exactly what you said, you book a slot, then you invite people to it. So recognizing and allowing for the greater time this is going to take from us to do it well.
And that's common, I think. We, to be candid, we did a training for about 6 or 8 organisations last January. People were enthusiastic, came to the training, and then didn't actually have the time to then apply it. And I think that's a common challenge. For me, the big challenge really is how can we make this core to what we do? This involves probably changing how we work so that this isn't on top of the business of everything else. Can I find an extra day a week to do this? Probably not. But if I made this a day a week of what I actually do, then how things would be different. That's not an easy thing for anybody to do. But I think the dividends of doing that, to say, rather than running to do things for people, to actually step back and say, if this group of people could be facilitated to become the leaders and they're then running it, then it's a different mode of working. Easier said than done, but I think that's really where you get the transformational change.
Yeah.
I was thinking, it could be helpful for churches that I'm working with to have almost like models of how they could set up a listening group or something. So like, these are a few examples of the ways people have done it. Step 1, do this. Step 2, and obviously that's not, you don't have to follow it step by step, but it's like, okay, this gives me an idea of what might work, and then we can adapt that for our context. And there's a couple of different ways we could do that.
So Hannah, you could see the value of a kind of basically a kind of written guide.
Yeah. And then there could be opportunity to have like a follow-up conversation with someone if you want to dive into that, or you have questions. But I can see, something that people can reference being helpful.
Those are both really helpful. Anybody else got specific thoughts on what would be helpful in your context?
For me, I'm quite new to my role, as those I've been in groups with I've sort of made clear, because I'm very much in a listening capacity at the moment, to make sure that I'm doing my job well for the trustees that I'm responsible to. And I think sort of some of what I'm looking out for is not only groups like this, but perhaps where I can sit in or take an active part in understanding through kind of an observation of a session, which I know can be quite difficult to access when these sessions are built so much on the trust of the participants and those who've got their lived experience. Having sort of someone sitting in the background or joining in for one session who they don't know can be potentially quite a tricky thing to ask. But I think in terms of what would help me, that would be a really valuable thing for me to be able to understand and appreciate that from sort of the inside, and then be able to take that away and try and duplicate that by doing. But I completely get that that's going to be quite a difficult thing to access because of how carefully curated those created spaces need to be for the people who are participating. So whilst that would be most beneficial for me, I can understand that that's probably not necessarily the best way to go about it for those that would be involved in those groups.
I think, I mean, it's horses for courses. The general kind of advice within Poverty Truth, because we had people asking that, was actually it does kind of mess up the process. So people just kind of popping in and observing. I think the hard answer to say is actually the best way is through participating in a process, or even facilitating if you've got the opportunity. But that does involve having the time to devote to it.
Yeah, maybe sort of that mentoring opportunity then to perhaps have someone come and create a space together within the context I have to work, so that I can sort of learn whilst we do it together, and then sort of allow myself the time to take that over and curate it well, sort of as once it's been demonstrated through someone who's done it several hundred times or something like that. Perhaps that would be a better way to do it, to sort of start fresh with someone who knows how to do it really, really successfully and really well, would perhaps be a better way of starting that out. Yeah, thanks.
Okay. I know, I think was it Hannah also put in a comment in the chat about interesting point about partnering with Citizens UK. We did in the past do organising, and I think I think that'd be an interesting conversation to pursue, because I think there are similarities and differences about this approach, but I think the potential for connecting between this kind of work and community organising is there. I think this is about how you get a group formed in the first place, and I think until there are more groups that are confident groups of people with lived experience, then that's the starting point for getting involved in community organising, and other forms of broader citizen engagement. But that would be an interesting conversation. Maybe I should say a bit more at this point. I mean, I will again get Felicity and Gav to kind of wave. Part of the reason I brought them along is, as Rachel said, I'm actually finishing at Church Action on Poverty next week. So this is my last public engagement. I've got a leaving due, but it's been fab to be part of this. But also to say that Felicity and Gav do this work. This is part of what they do, and part of what we do as an organisation. And Felicity, do you just briefly want to talk about the training programme that we're kind of putting together?
Yeah, so we are developing a training course for exactly this kind of work, which will be starting in September. And the idea is to bring together people from different, churches and community organisations who are working directly with people with lived experience and want to facilitate groups and do this kind of participative work. And it's a long-term training course. Did we say it's going to be 9 months overall? So we'll have an initial couple of days together in Manchester to get to know each other and begin to understand and explore the methodology. But then the idea is that you will then go back to your contexts and put what you've been learning into action. And then over a period of a couple of months, and then we'll come back together and we'll talk about how that went and how that's going, and then begin to explore sort of the next stage and the new concepts. So we're learning participative methods, but we're doing it in a participative way, and very much based on the work you're actually doing in your contexts.
So that's the one starting in September is the kind of pilot for this. I mean, it's based on what we've been doing for many years, so it's not kind of completely new. But we are looking then to that one will be based in Manchester, but we're looking, and we've got funding to be able to offer this kind of program and approach to work with other partners and in other parts of the country. So if you're interested in finding more about that, or indeed the church-based Poverty Truth Commission model that FLIST is also facilitating, then I think what we'll do is send in the email after the event contact details. And I think whether it's that particular training or whether it's the mentoring or even the written guides, I'd encourage you to kind of follow the conversation up with the team, with Felicity and Gav, and see what else we can do, what support we can offer you. And if there's multiple partners, then potentially we could form a learning set or community of learning, and do something collaboratively. So I think that's kind of the offer we're wanting to make to anybody. And rather than at this stage, then we haven't produced written resources because I think our approach is very relational. So we'd love to have a conversation, and I'm saying that on behalf of colleagues, to see what would be useful in your context. And if you know of other organisations that are interested, or you're a network, then equally we could potentially do something, or we could repeat the session itself for people that you're working with, just to give them a kind of overview of what some of the key approaches are, and then see where that conversation takes people. So I think that's probably enough for now, unless anybody's got a last question or comment. Gav is more on the communications side. So Gav, do you want to just say a couple of words about the kind of the lived experience work that you do, which is slightly different, but worth.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. Yeah, so my role in a nutshell is to help amplify the voices of people with experience of poverty, which takes in a range of things. Sometimes it's media training, sometimes it's supporting people to do either individual or community storytelling projects. We work with sort of groups from some of our pantries, some other projects to help do media work, sometimes liaising with trusted journalists we know. So yeah, I think I provide sort of support wherever I can, really, for anybody who wants to talk publicly about this kind of work when it reaches that point. And certainly if you want to sort of celebrate positives and talk about what's happening and what's going well and what arises out of this kind of community building participation, then yeah, I'd be absolutely delighted to chat to anybody.
Thanks, Gav. That's a very short. Storytelling for us is really powerful, and I mean, you heard a little bit of Penny's story. We may share. There's a whole video being produced as part of Food Power, which I think we will put in the email that comes out, because the power of people's stories, not just as a kind of a curiosity, but the power of story to actually change hearts and minds, to reframe what poverty looks like from the perspective of people with lived experience, is one of the things that really is transformational. And that's why we invest so much in the storytelling as well as the facilitation. So yeah,
Are you, sorry, Neil, just to clarify, are you saying all this kind of information you've been giving us, is that going to be in an email that you'll be sending to us? Or do we need to ask for that?
There'll be the email that you'll get. Well, I'll talk to Alicia and Esther about it. We can put the resources that have been shared on the screen. There's the recording of the session itself, and then there's one or two other resources that we can add.
Well, like for me, it would be like the details of the training and stuff, Gav, that you could offer, as well as those kinds of things that we could pick up for our organisations with.
So we'll send the details of the training. What we've done is provided details of this first training, but as I said, we can then, that's something we can in due course replicate.
Okay.
And maybe we'll get Gav to just do a little paragraph about what Gav can offer.
Yeah,
brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
So that we'll roll that all into one email rather than sending different bits out.
Yeah. Thank you.
It feels like a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but hopefully you've got something useful out of that, and it's been great to be with you.